United 232, we're going to try a left turn and see if we can get you lined up for final approach here. We're showing the airport right at your 1 o'clock position now, about 7 miles out. The voice of the air traffic controller carried across the radio waves on that scorching July afternoon in 1989, unaware that he was witnessing aviation history in the making. Captain Al Haynes, his voice steady despite the impossible circumstances, responded with words that would echo through aviation corridors forever. "We'll take a right turn if you don't mind. We can only turn right, we can't turn left." In the cockpit of United Airlines Flight 232, 3 experienced pilots were attempting the unthinkable, fighting to control a massive DC-10 aircraft using nothing but engine thrust after a catastrophic failure had severed all hydraulic systems. What began as a routine summer flight from Denver to Chicago would become one of the most extraordinary displays of human ingenuity and courage in aviation history, a testament to the power of teamwork under impossible odds, and a tragedy that would forever change how we think about aircraft design and emergency procedures. The morning of July 19, 1989, dawned clear and bright across the American Midwest. United Airlines Flight 232, a McDonnell Douglas DC-1010, sat gleaming on the tarmac at Denver's Stapleton International Airport, preparing for what should have been a routine 2-hour flight to Chicago O'Hare. The aircraft, registration number N1819U, was a veteran of the skies, having entered service in 1971 and accumulating over 43,000 flight hours during its 18 years of faithful service. Built during the golden age of wide-body aircraft development, the DC-10 represented the pinnacle of 1970s aviation technology, capable of carrying 285 passengers across continents with unprecedented comfort and efficiency. The aircraft's 3-engine configuration, with 1 mounted in the tail and 2 wing-mounted engines, provided both power and redundancy that made it a favorite among airlines worldwide. On this particular Wednesday, Flight 232 carried 285 passengers and 11 crew members, a mix of business travelers, families heading home from summer vacations, and tourists eager to explore the windy city. In the cockpit, Captain Alfred Clare, Al Haynes, settled into the left seat with the confidence that comes from over 33 years of flying experience and more than 7,000 hours in DC-10 aircraft. At 57 years old, Haynes embodied the best of airline professionalism, known throughout United Airlines, for his calm demeanor, exceptional judgment, and unwavering commitment to safety. His silver hair and warm smile had put countless passengers at ease over the decades, but beneath that gentle exterior lay a pilot's pilot, someone who understood aircraft systems with an almost intuitive grasp. First Officer William Records, 48, occupied the right seat, bringing his own wealth of experience with over 20,000 total flight hours, including substantial time in the DC-10. Records was known for his meticulous attention to detail and excellent crew resource management skills, qualities that would prove invaluable in the hours to come. Flight engineer Dudley Dvorak, 51, monitored the complex systems from his panel behind the pilots, his engineer's mind constantly processing the myriad of data that kept the massive aircraft functioning flawlessly. The 3 men had flown together before and shared the easy camaraderie that comes from mutual respect and professional competence. As Flight 232 pushed back from the gate at 2:09 p.m. local time, the summer heat shimmered off the Denver tarmac, creating those familiar waves that pilots know mean a bumpy climb out. The passengers settled in for what they expected would be an unremarkable flight, some already opening books or magazines, others gazing out the windows at the majestic Rocky Mountains that formed Denver's western backdrop. Children pressed their faces against the small oval windows, watching ground crews scurry about their duties, while flight attendants moved through the cabin with their practiced efficiency, ensuring everyone was comfortable and secure for takeoff. The cabin hummed with the quiet conversations of travelers, the rustle of newspapers, and the occasional laugh from someone sharing a story or joke. In the first-class cabin, business executives reviewed presentations on their laptops, while in coach, families with young children distributed snacks and toys to keep little ones entertained during the flight ahead. At 2:09 p.m., Flight 232 began its takeoff roll down runway 35L, the 3 Pratt & Whitney JT9D engines spooling up to full power and producing the distinctive roar that DC-10 passengers knew well. Captain Haynes advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the familiar surge of acceleration as nearly 400,000 pounds of aircraft, fuel, and human dreams gathered speed down the runway. The takeoff was textbook perfect, the aircraft lifting off at precisely the calculated speed and climbing into the clear Colorado sky with the grace of a metal bird that had performed this dance thousands of times before. As Denver fell away beneath them, the Rocky Mountains stretched out in all their summer glory, snow-capped peaks glistening in the afternoon sun, while green valleys and sparkling reservoirs painted the landscape below. The climb was smooth and steady, the aircraft performing flawlessly as it followed its assigned route toward the northeast, bound for the flat farmlands of Iowa and Illinois that lay ahead. For the first hour and 40 minutes of flight, everything proceeded exactly as planned. The aircraft cruised at 37,000 feet, riding the smooth air above the weather while covering ground at nearly 500 miles per hour. Passengers had settled into their flying routines, some napping in the comfortable cabin, others enjoying the meal service that United was famous for in those days. Children colored in activity books while parents gazed out at the endless expanse of clouds below, and business travelers tapped away on early laptop computers or reviewed documents for meetings awaiting them in Chicago. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with their customary professionalism, refilling coffee cups, answering questions, and ensuring that everyone was comfortable. In the cockpit, the three pilots maintained their vigilant watch over the aircraft systems, occasionally chatting about family, flying experiences, or the beautiful weather they were enjoying. Captain Haynes remarked to his crew about how smoothly the flight was progressing, noting that they were actually running a few minutes ahead of schedule and would likely arrive at O'Hare slightly early. At exactly 3:16 p.m. Central Time, as Flight 232 cruised peacefully above the Iowa farmland at 37,000 feet, the unthinkable happened. A massive explosion rocked the aircraft, the sound reverberating through the cabin like thunder, followed immediately by violent shaking that threw passengers against their seatbelts and sent flight attendants stumbling down the aisles. In the tail section of the aircraft, the number 2 engine, mounted high on the fuselage just forward of the vertical stabilizer, had experienced what engineers call an uncontained engine failure. The fan disc, a critical rotating component weighing several hundred pounds, had fractured due to a metallurgical flaw that had gone undetected for years, sending razor-sharp metal fragments exploding outward at tremendous velocity. These fragments, traveling faster than bullets, severed all 3 independent hydraulic systems that controlled the aircraft's flight surfaces, turning the sophisticated DC-10 into an uncontrollable projectile hurtling through the sky. The explosion was so violent that it punched holes through the aircraft's skin and damaged the horizontal stabilizer, the critical surface that provides pitch control and stability. In the cockpit, Captain Haynes immediately felt the aircraft begin to roll uncontrollably to the right, the controls becoming completely unresponsive in his hands. The control yoke, normally sensitive to the slightest input, now moved freely with no effect whatsoever on the aircraft's behavior. "We've lost number 2 engine," First Officer Records called out, his training taking over as he began running through emergency checklists. But this was unlike any emergency they had ever trained for. Flight Engineer Dvorak's panel lit up like a Christmas tree with warning lights and alarms, hydraulic pressure gauges dropping to 0 across all 3 independent systems. The aircraft continued its uncontrolled right roll, the horizon spinning sickeningly through the cockpit windows as passengers screamed in terror, convinced they were about to die. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as the aircraft's violent maneuvers triggered the emergency systems, adding to the chaos and fear that now gripped everyone aboard. Haynes fought desperately with the controls, his decades of experience telling him that something was catastrophically wrong, but nothing in his training had prepared him for complete loss of flight controls. What happened next would become legendary in aviation circles, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of crew resource management under impossible circumstances. As Captain Haynes struggled with the unresponsive controls, he noticed that by adjusting the thrust on the 2 remaining wing-mounted engines, he could influence the aircraft's roll rate. Adding power to the left engine while reducing power to the right engine helped counter the aircraft's tendency to roll right. while symmetric power changes affected the aircraft's pitch attitude. It was an incredibly crude form of control, like trying to steer a car using only the parking brake, but it was the only option they had. Flight engineer Dvorak quickly calculated that they had lost all hydraulic fluid, meaning that the flight controls, landing gear, wheel brakes, and even the nose wheel steering were completely inoperative. The aircraft was essentially a 200-ton glider with 2 functioning engines, trying to maintain controlled flight through engine power alone, something that had never been successfully accomplished in aviation history. Recognizing that he needed help beyond what his 2-man crew could provide, Captain Haynes made a decision that would prove crucial to their survival chances. He called for any off-duty pilots who might be traveling as passengers to come to the cockpit and assist. United Airlines instructor pilot Dennis Fitch, who happened to be flying as a passenger in first class, immediately responded to the call. Fitch, an expert DC-10 pilot with extensive experience in the aircraft, quickly assessed the situation and took over the throttle controls, allowing Haynes to focus on radio communications and overall command decisions while records worked through emergency procedures. The 4 pilots now faced a challenge that no crew had ever encountered, attempting to land an aircraft using only engine thrust for control, with no conventional flight controls, no landing gear extension system, no wheel brakes, and no nose wheel steering. It was, quite literally, an impossible task, but they were the only hope for the 285 passengers and 11 crew members whose lives depended on their skill, courage, and determination. The aircraft's behavior was unlike anything any of them had experienced, oscillating between climbs and descents in a series of what pilots call phugoid oscillations, long, slow cycles that made the aircraft nearly impossible to control with precision. Adding power to both engines would cause the nose to rise and the aircraft to climb, while reducing power would initiate a descent. But the lag time between throttle inputs and aircraft response made it incredibly difficult to maintain a stable flight path. The aircraft also had a persistent tendency to turn right due to the asymmetric damage and the loss of the tail-mounted engine, requiring constant left engine adjustments to maintain any semblance of straight flight. Passengers, initially terrified by the violent maneuvers following the explosion, now found themselves on an aerial roller coaster, alternately pressed into their seats during climbs and lifted against their seat belts during descents, all while the aircraft slowly turned in great, sweeping arcs across the Iowa sky. Meanwhile, air traffic control centers across the Midwest mobilized to assist the crippled flight. Controllers at Minneapolis Center, who were handling Flight 232's route, immediately began coordinating with airports within the aircraft's limited range, calculating fuel consumption, weather conditions, and runway configurations to determine the best possible landing site. The crew initially considered returning to Denver, but calculations quickly showed that the aircraft lacked the fuel and controllability to make such a long flight. Des Moines, Iowa, emerged as a possibility, but as the pilots struggled to maintain control, it became clear that Sioux City, Iowa, with its longer runway and better emergency response capabilities, represented their best hope for survival. Colonel Dennis Nielsen, the air traffic controller handling Flight 232, became their lifeline to the ground, providing vectors, weather information, and coordinating the massive emergency response that was mobilizing at Sioux Gateway Airport. As word of the emergency spread through the aviation community, airports along Flight 232's path began preparing for the worst-case scenario. At Sioux Gateway Airport, emergency crews scrambled to position fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue equipment along both sides of the runway. Local hospitals activated their disaster protocols, calling in off-duty medical personnel and preparing trauma centers for what could be hundreds of casualties. The Iowa National Guard dispatched helicopters to the area, while the Federal Aviation Administration alerted its accident investigation teams. Air traffic controllers cleared the airspace around Sioux City, ensuring that Flight 232 would have unrestricted access to the airport without interference from other aircraft. The media, monitoring air traffic control frequencies, began reporting the unfolding drama, and soon television news crews were racing toward Sioux City to witness what many expected would be a catastrophic crash. In the passenger cabin, flight attendants Jan Brown, Susan White, and Renee LeBeau worked heroically to prepare their passengers for what they knew would be an extremely dangerous landing attempt. Without revealing the full extent of the crisis to avoid panic, they moved through the cabin instructing passengers on proper crash positions, relocating people away from potential hazard areas, and identifying able-bodied passengers who could assist in an evacuation. The flight attendants' calm professionalism helped prevent panic, even as passengers could clearly sense that something was terribly wrong. Children, sensing their parents' fear, began crying, while adults tried to comfort one another and prepare mentally for whatever was coming. Some passengers wrote notes to loved ones, while others prayed quietly, holding hands with strangers who had become brothers and sisters in their shared peril. Back in the cockpit, the four pilots continued their unprecedented battle to maintain control of the aircraft as they descended towards Sioux City. Dennis Fitch, his hands on the throttles, made countless minute adjustments to engine power, trying to anticipate the aircraft's oscillations and counter them before they became too severe. The aircraft's speed varied wildly, sometimes dropping dangerously slow toward stall speed, other times building to velocities that threatened to tear the damaged structure apart. Captain Haynes maintained radio contact with air traffic control, his voice remaining remarkably calm despite the impossible circumstances, earning the admiration of controllers and pilots monitoring the frequency. His leadership in the cockpit was exemplary, coordinating the efforts of his expanded crew while making the critical decisions that would determine their fate. As they approached Sioux City, the pilots faced their next major challenge, somehow extending the landing gear without hydraulic power. The DC-10's landing gear was designed to be lowered using hydraulic pressure, with only a manual backup system for the main gear, and no backup at all for the nose gear. Flight engineer Dvorak worked frantically through emergency procedures, eventually managing to get the main landing gear extended using the manual system. But the nose gear remained stubbornly retracted, meaning they would have to land on the main wheels only, with the nose of the aircraft eventually settling onto the runway when speed decreased. This would be like trying to land a massive seesaw, with the aircraft's center of gravity behind the main landing gear, making it inherently unstable once it touched down. The approach to Sioux City's runway 22 became a masterclass in airmanship under impossible conditions. The aircraft was descending much faster than normal, around 800 feet per minute, compared to the typical 600 feet per minute for a normal approach, because the pilots simply could not control their descent rate precisely enough to maintain a stabilized approach. Their airspeed was also higher than normal, fluctuating between 190 and 250 knots, when it should have been a steady 140 knots. But again, precise speed control was impossible, with only engine thrust for control. The aircraft continued to oscillate through climbs and descents, sometimes gaining altitude when the pilots needed to descend, other times diving toward the ground when they desperately needed to climb. It was like riding a bucking bronco while trying to thread a needle, requiring split-second timing and extraordinary skill to have any chance of reaching the runway in a survivable configuration. Airport rescue and firefighting crews positioned themselves along runway 22, knowing that even if the aircraft managed to reach the runway, the landing would be unlike anything they had ever seen. Without wheel brakes or nose-wheel steering, the aircraft would be unable to stop normally or maintain directional control once it touched down. Fire trucks and ambulances lined both sides of the runway, while helicopters circled overhead to provide aerial views of the approach and immediate emergency response if needed. Television news crews, having rushed to the airport, set up cameras to capture what many expected would be aviation's most spectacular crash landing. The world was watching as Flight 232 lined up for its final approach, carrying the hopes and prayers of everyone who understood the magnitude of what the crew was attempting. At 4:00 p.m. local time, exactly 44 minutes after the initial engine failure, Flight 232 crossed the runway threshold at Sioux Gateway Airport. The aircraft was in a right bank, descending rapidly and traveling much faster than any normal landing. But incredibly, the four pilots had managed to guide it to the runway despite having no conventional flight controls. The first touchdown occurred on the right main landing gear, followed immediately by the left main gear as the aircraft briefly made contact with the runway surface. For a moment, it appeared that the impossible had been accomplished, that human skill and determination had overcome mechanical failure in the most dramatic way imaginable. Spectators, both at the airport and watching on television, held their breath as the massive DC-10 seemed to settle onto the runway, its pilots having achieved what many aviation experts had declared impossible. But the laws of physics are unforgiving, and the aircraft's high speed, steep descent angle, and lack of precise control made a conventional landing impossible. As the aircraft touched down, it immediately began to veer to the right, the pilots having no way to correct for the directional deviation without nosewheel steering or differential braking. The right wing tip struck the runway surface, and the aircraft began to cartwheel, the enormous forces generated by the impact tearing the structure apart as it rolled inverted and slid down the runway in a shower of sparks and debris. The fuselage broke into several large sections. Fuel ignited, creating a massive fireball that rose hundreds of feet into the air, and the sound of rending metal and exploding fuel tanks echoed across the Iowa prairie. The crew's heroic efforts had brought the aircraft to the runway, but the impact forces were simply too great for the structure to withstand. In those first critical moments after the crash, the airport's emergency response team sprang into action with precision and courage that saved countless lives. Fire trucks raced alongside the wreckage, pumping thousands of gallons of foam onto the burning sections, while rescue personnel searched frantically for survivors. The aircraft's cabin had broken into several pieces, some of which remained relatively intact, providing survival spaces for passengers who might otherwise have perished. Flight attendants who had survived the impact immediately began evacuating passengers from the damaged cabin sections, their training and courage under fire proving invaluable in the chaotic moments following the crash. Jan Brown, despite suffering serious injuries herself, continued to assist passengers until rescue crews could take over, embodying the finest traditions of airline cabin crew service. Amazingly, of the 296 people aboard Flight 232, 185 survived the crash, a testament to the skill of the flight crew, the professionalism of the cabin crew, the effectiveness of the emergency response, and perhaps most importantly, the revolutionary changes in aircraft design and safety procedures that had occurred since aviation's early days. The survival rate of over 60% in what should have been an unsurvivable accident was nothing short of miraculous, attributed to factors ranging from improved seat designs and cabin materials to better emergency procedures and crew training. The passengers who survived would carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of their lives, but they were alive to tell the story of human courage and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Captain Al Haynes, First Officer Bill Records, Flight Engineer Dudley Dvorak, and Instructor Pilot Dennis Fitch became aviation heroes, their names forever linked with one of the most extraordinary displays of airmanship in commercial aviation history. Their ability to maintain some semblance of control over an uncontrollable aircraft for 44 minutes, bringing it to a runway when conventional wisdom said it was impossible, represented the very best of human skill, training, and determination. Captain Haynes, in particular, became a sought-after speaker in aviation circles, sharing the lessons learned from Flight 232 and emphasizing the importance of crew resource management, the principle that all crew members should contribute their expertise to solving problems rather than relying solely on the captain's authority. The investigation into Flight 232's crash revealed critical flaws in the design and manufacturing of aircraft engines, leading to sweeping changes in inspection procedures, manufacturing quality control, and engine certification requirements. The engine failure that initiated the crisis was caused by a metallurgical defect in the titanium fan disc that had gone undetected for years, a flaw so small that existing inspection techniques could not identify it. The General Electric CF6 engines that powered many DC-10s worldwide were immediately subjected to enhanced inspection procedures, while new non-destructive testing techniques were developed to identify similar flaws before they could cause catastrophic failures. The aviation industry invested billions of dollars in improved manufacturing processes, inspection technologies, and quality control procedures to prevent similar accidents. Perhaps more importantly, Flight 232 led to fundamental changes in aircraft hydraulic system design and pilot training. The DC-10's hydraulic systems, while meeting all existing certification requirements, were vulnerable to a single-point failure that could disable all flight controls simultaneously. Future aircraft designs incorporated additional backup systems, including manual reversion capabilities for primary flight controls and alternative control methods that could function even with complete hydraulic failure. Pilot training programs began including scenarios involving total control system failures, teaching crews how to use engine thrust for flight control and preparing them mentally for situations that were previously considered impossible to survive. The human stories that emerged from Flight 232 were as compelling as the technical lessons learned. Families were torn apart and brought together. Survivors struggled with guilt over living when others died, and heroes emerged from every section of the aircraft. Jerry Schemmel, a passenger who survived the crash, later dedicated his life to inspirational speaking and helping others cope with trauma. The Michelson family lost several members, but found strength in their surviving relatives and the support of the aviation community. Flight attendant Jan Brown returned to flying after recovering from her injuries, continuing to serve passengers with the same dedication she had shown during the crisis. These personal stories remind us that behind every aviation accident are real people whose lives are forever changed by events beyond their control. The legacy of United Flight 232 continues to influence aviation safety and training more than 3 decades after the crash. Modern aircraft incorporate multiple levels of redundancy in their control systems, advanced fly-by-wire technologies that can maintain control even with significant system failures, and improved structural designs that better protect passengers during crash landings. Flight simulators now include scenarios based on Flight 232's engine failure, teaching new generations of pilots how to work as teams to solve unprecedented problems. The accident also led to improvements in emergency response procedures at airports worldwide, ensuring that rescue crews are better prepared for the complex challenges posed by modern aircraft accidents. The 4 pilots of Flight 232 demonstrated that even in the face of impossible odds, human skill, determination, and teamwork can achieve results that seem to defy the laws of physics. Their 44-minute battle to control an uncontrollable aircraft stands as one of aviation's finest hours, a reminder that behind all the technology and procedures that keep us safe in the air are dedicated professionals who will never give up, never stop fighting, and never abandon their passengers even when faced with certain death. Captain Al Haynes summarized their achievement best when he said years later that they had not performed a miracle, but had simply done their jobs to the very best of their ability when it mattered most. If this incredible story of human courage and determination has moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from aviation history. Share this story with others who appreciate tales of heroism and the indomitable human spirit, because the memory of those who died in Flight 232's crash and the courage of those who fought to save them deserves to be remembered forever. The next time you board an aircraft, remember the lessons learned from Flight 232 and the dedicated professionals who work tirelessly to keep aviation the safest form of transportation ever devised. These stories matter because they remind us that even in our darkest moments, human beings are capable of extraordinary things when they refuse to give up hope and continue fighting for each other until the very end.